Well, hello and welcome to this session. I'm honored to be part of this event and grateful for the opportunity. My name is Allan Mann, and I'm an indie author, self-publisher. I grew up in Scotland, but for the past 27 years, I've called Central Kentucky my home. I've spent my career in aviation and still work actually for a private aviation program here in the United States. Over the past couple of years, though, I've published 3 books and I'm currently working on 2 more. During the writing of these books, I developed a system based on my own way of working, along with research and tips and tricks from other authors. The method I use, I call the writer system. And in this session, I want to share that with you and show you how I use it to outline my story, develop a synopsis, and work through those elements into the first draft of the book. So I have a feeling that I am like many of you watching this session. That is, I'm a relatively new author, one who has to juggle the desire to write with the need to hold down a full-time career beyond my efforts as an author and the business of writing. Now, I'm the type of person who likes to really dig into the processes of whatever I am doing. And sometimes this means that I take too much time working on the mechanics of writing than actually writing anything down. So that's bad if you want to deliver books to the marketplace. But in this case, it's good because the research I've conducted over the last 2 to 3 years has led me to develop this writer system I'm going to talk about today. So let's dive right in. So the writer system is a way of setting down key elements of your fiction story, including characters, the place they inhabit, building a synopsis, plotting out the main beats crucial to your novel. And it does this in a way that is logical and provides opportunities to expand, change, rearrange, whatever your thoughts. Allow for the creative process to happen, yet remain structured and organized, a checklist of sorts, something that comes directly from my upbringing as a professional pilot. We use checklists all the time. So I work in Scrivener, so I'll be using that program to show you how I lay out my system and use it to organize and write the books. This template will be available for everyone to download and use, which is great if you use Scrivener. But if you don't, I'll also include a PDF version of the layout, and you can adjust it to fit your own writing regime. So let's take a look at my setup in Scrivener. So here we are, my Scrivener template all loaded up, and I'll begin with the plot section. This is where all your hard work will take place, and it's divided into 3 areas. Outlining, the working plot thread, and the 4-act structure. So let's talk about the 4-act structure. Now, everybody's heard, I'm sure, of the 3-act structure. It seems to be the thing. But again, in my research and reading, and again, something that works for me in this particular case, you see a lot of times when there's a 3-act structure: Act 1, Act 2A, Act 2B, and Act 3. I'm definitely in the camp of, well, if there's a 2A and a 2B, then that's 2 different things. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the way I've structured this. It's a 4-act structure, and we'll get into the plot points and all the beat points here within the structure here shortly. So let's back up and go to the first section of the writer system. Well, what is the writer system? What does that mean? Well, writer, W-R-I-T-E-R. The first is world. So the world, where? Where does your story take place? Where do your characters live? What are all the environmental considerations? What part of the world? What's the weather like? Is it a real place? Is it like a Star Wars type story? What is the world? So in this, again, I will go over very quickly what these points are, and then we'll back up and look at each one in a little bit more detail. The next letter, R, is rival. The rival, the antagonist, the bad guy in the story. We got to set down who that or what that thing or person is. Idol. Who's your hero? Who's your protagonist? The good guy. T is for twists, and that's plural. So again, we'll come back to that. There are three game changers in the beats within the four-act structure, and so there are a couple of twists in your story. E is the end. What's the end game? And the climax of the story. And R is for resolve. And have you answered all the questions within the story? And rewind and look at the story from that aspect. So again, let's go back up then. So writer, world, rival, idol, twists, and resolve. World, let's start there. So you have to really describe your world in broad strokes. Where does your story take place? Obviously, if it's a fictional story, you can be anywhere. You can be somewhere that you know. I grew up on the east coast of Scotland, so my books are set in the east coast, in towns that I know very, very well. If you're creating something that's in a science fantasy or a science fiction world, say Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett is an author that I read everything that he put on paper. And obviously his Discworld series is completely made up. The world is made up. The ideas may be very true to our daily lives, but the world is made up. So develop that. And again, if you're basing your story in real life, in a real place, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, London, Barcelona, somewhere that maybe you have been, don't be afraid of adding places that suit the story. Just because it isn't there in real life doesn't mean that you can't add to that. So in this section, as in the other sections, on this document, what I want you to do is to outline your world, just in broad strokes. What does that look like? Where is that location? Maybe you have something in mind. Your story is similar to another story. Let's say you're doing a science fiction type story, and maybe Star Wars or Star Trek or something like that. That world is similar to your world. Then lean on those things to put your world together. So outline it here in world. Moving on, rival. So who's the bad guy, the villain, the antagonist? So with whom or what is your good guy going to be battling? So it's good to figure out who the bad guy is going to be. A strong antagonist is key to a good story. If that antagonist is a person, then make them believable. Craft them in such a way that you can sympathize on some level with them or their goals. Almost be sympathetic with them. Well, be sympathetic with them, but to a point. And the point is, beyond that point is what makes them the bad guy. So they have to be very believable, and you have to be somewhat sympathetic to that character for it to be a very good, effective, believable foil to your good guy. Again, just outline it here. Just outline it in points. In this first time through, just put your thoughts on paper. I for idol. So your hero, the good guy, the protagonist, the center of the story. Again, just outline who this person is. Has to be believable, probably has a lot of faults. Again, there's going to be some conflict there. There's going to be conflict with the antagonist, the bad guy, the rival, but there's also going to be some internal conflict. So just put down your thoughts here. And again, these are all broad brush strokes. T for twists. We'll see in just a second that there are three game changers. There's a game changer in Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 in this four-act structure. And then there's a plot twist in the tail. So Act 4, there's going to be the twist, if you like, in the tail. And the climax, and there's going to be a twist, and you're going to change it up, and there's going to be a rush to action to solve that right at the very end. So what is that? So you've set out your world, you've set out your main characters, and you've set out basically the plot twist. And we're going to back up a little bit from that in E and end. What is the end game? What is the end game of the climax? What is the end game between your protagonist and your antagonist? And really, what is the end game of once everything is resolved, and that's our next point? What do you want the reader to know? Again, just put it all down here, just in broad brush note format. An R in writer, resolve. So have you answered all the questions in the story? If not, you can expect the reader is going to find the holes in the story too. So what are all the plot holes that may be there, and try and then fix them. So you're actually starting from the big picture world. You have your main characters, your plot twists, the things that throw everything into confusion. What is the end game? What is the climax and the end game of the story? And then work your way backwards to make sure that everything is resolved within the story. So again, big picture, writer system, big picture. Now, once you have all of those filled out and completed and just fleshed out a little bit, we then move on to the other part of the outlining side of things, and that's the premise. How do we create a premise for your story? Well, we do that one of a couple of ways, and Chris. We do that in a couple of ways. Again, this is nothing new here, but the way that I've put it together hopefully will allow you to formulate your ideas a little bit more clearly. So, a synopsis. What is a synopsis? Well, by definition, you're going to start short, very short, then expand. So before you go through this exercise, you already have that big picture in your mind. We've gone through that writer checklist. You've got the world, the people, the plot twists, how you want it to end up. So you've got that big picture, and you probably started this exercise with the big picture in mind, what your story is going to be about in some way, shape, or form. So before you get into that more complex story arc and the character arcs, you got to start small and expand. So what is the absolutely shortest way to describe the story? Start it out that way. Start by trying to write the hook for your book and its listing on Amazon, for example. So something like, in this section, you would write your synopsis. Synopsis number 1, because we're going to do this a couple of times. Synopsis number 1. A clothing company loses their head of R&D, tied to the cliffs below the high tide line. The investigation uncovers a web of lies and cover-ups. Okay, so what's that? 2 sentences. So the shortest synopsis possible for actually my Tom Guthrie trilogy book 1 story. So a clothing company loses their head of R&D, tied to cliffs below the high tide line. The investigation uncovers a web of lies and cover-ups. Okay, so we've created our very first synopsis, short and sweet. So take that synopsis and now go to the question section. And we're going to cut and paste if you want. There we go. Synopsis number 1, clothing company, etc., etc. And you're just going to ask questions. Ask questions and questions and questions of those 2 sentences. Just let it flow. See what comes up. So here we go. So what clothing company? Answer the question. Ogilvy Outerwear, in this case, in my story. So where is the company located? Arbroath, that's the town, that's part of your world. What do they make? Primarily outdoor activity clothing. Who dies? What lies and cover-ups? Who's investigating? So all of those questions come out of this one synopsis. So you take those answers to that set of questions from synopsis number 1, and you go back to your synopsis and you write synopsis number 2. So there we go. Go to the questions page, ask as many questions posed by synopsis number 1, then use them to create synopsis number 2. So we take all those answers and write this. The head of R&D for Ogilvy Outerwear, Bobby Gant, is found tied to the cliffs below the high tide line in Arbroath. Tom Guthrie, a retired detective sergeant, is called in by a resource-strapped Police Scotland to help lead the investigation, much to the annoyance of his former CID partner, now boss of the local station, Ian Buchanan. Guthrie is tasked with solving the murder as well as looking after a young, overenthusiastic PC assigned to the inquiry. They quickly realize that the owners of the clothing company are holding back details from them. And now let's repeat that process. So cut and paste that back over to the questions. There we go. Synopsis number 2. And ask a whole bunch of questions from that. Was Gant dead before or after he was tied to the rocks? Did the killers want him to be found? Why? Etc., etc., etc. And answer all of those questions. Use those answers and create a third synopsis. So go through that process, I would say at least 3 times. So you've expanded from this 2-sentence synopsis number 1 to a much more complete, slightly more detailed third synopsis. And you're going to take all of that information and write your 4-act structure. So over here on the left, all of these folders and sections in Scrivener, we're now at this working plot thread. So 2 sections here, plot arc and character arc. The plot arc, what I've done is I've copied and pasted that one synopsis. And again, I've just color coded it just so you can more easily see what we're talking about here. So again, use this last synopsis you've created, outline your plot. Break that down into the 4 acts of the story. Use these as a starting point for that 4-act structure section that we'll get to in a second. So again, color-coded. You got to know what I'm talking about on the 4-act structure. Well, Act 1, preparation. Act 2, reaction. Act 3, proaction. And Act 4 is the conclusion. Again, we'll come back to that in a second. Not too important that you know what those are at this point, but just go through the process for now. So preparation. Most everybody knows that part of that preparation, the inciting incident and things like that, all come in that first act. That status quo of your good guy, your idol. The status quo section is that preparation section. The inciting incident, what leads him out of his norm, out of his or her day-to-day dealings in his or her life into the story. So in this case, the preparation, the head of R&D for Ogilvy Outerwear, Bobby Gant, is found tied to the cliffs below high tide line in Arbroath. The reaction then for your idol comes in that Act 2 part. So all of these magenta colored sentences here reflect the reaction. What Tom Guthrie in this case, our good guy, our so everything Tom Guthrie, our good guy, our idol in our story, needs to do in that second act is all highlighted here. Proaction is when the action shifts a little bit from trying to kind of keep up with the story. Our idol is now taking steps to resolve the conflict. And that would come in my version of the 3-act, well, not mine, it's out there, that 4-act structure. So in blue, I've highlighted that here. So Guthrie decides to pressure Ogilvy. So he's being proactive in the story. And then the conclusion, the end game, if you have your twists set up in your synopsis, then that would be part of this green section here. Under the section, you also can have the character arcs. Again, you can through this whole writer system and the premise system here, those processes, you can also put some notes together for your characters. There are also sections in Scrivener up here in the character section, again, I've just added your protagonist, your sidekick, your rival, your bit players, whatever you want to, however many characters you have, they're already preloaded in all of the Scrivener templates. But I've just added some here just to highlight those. And so you can take this information here. Again, this is more like your notepad, and then put them into the protagonist section here. And, there's Liam Neeson, great idol for a story. So again, giving me a visual of who my hero is. So you can take those character notes and add them to your actual character templates up here. So where do we go from there? So a lot of discussion so far on this 4-act structure. And again, let's focus on all of these points, these beats within your story. I think there are about 12 here, just off the top of my head without counting them. So if we look at Act 1, and again, I've broken it down for you just to give you a checklist. It's more of a guide in this case of how much writing, how much of your novel, your story should take place in each of these acts. So in the preparation, I've said about 20%, and if you're looking at an 80,000 word novel, you can equate that or change that to words, just a project or a word target for you. The reaction, 25%, proaction 25%, and your conclusion 30%. Again, nothing set in stone with these numbers. This is a place to start, and you let your creativity run riot all the way through this. So in preparation, again, there's nothing extraordinary about this information. Plot point 1, the inciting incident. Game changer. How does the main character, your idol, get locked into the story? And then the first transition. The transition from this day to day, the normal, the status quo of your idol, your protagonist's life, into the story itself. How does that idol get locked into the story? And again, because we're in Scrivener here, you can add additional chapters here. You can delete things, change things around. But I'm just showing you here that you can add an additional chapter. Maybe you go straight from this inciting incident to the lock-in, and those follow in your story just as they are. Maybe you need to add a chapter here, for example. That's fine, or several chapters. So you can always add to this template and make it your own. So from the lock-in, we go through a transition into now your idol is locked into the story and he's reacting to what's going on. In the story, say a crime fiction novel, you have a murder or whatever goes on here. That sets up the introduction of the character who's locked into investigating the circumstances of the murder, and he's reacting to some information, interviewing suspects, interviewing family members. The clues are coming thick and fast. So how are they reacting to that? Forensics, all that information that normally comes in a story is coming in this second act. And we have a game changer here. Is that first culmination. So it's your plot point 3, your first culmination of the story. So the story is kind of on this upward trajectory at this point from the normal. Here we are. We've our first look at our idol here in his or her everyday life, and things are ramping up. And we've got this first culmination here. We go into a second transition into the third act. So this would be 2B if you're a 3-act structure kind of person. So Act 3, proaction. Now we've turned the corner a little bit here through this first culmination. Maybe something has clicked in the investigation of this murder. We've turned a corner. We've got this great piece of information now, this magic clue or whatever, and we transition into this Act 3, where our idol, our main character, is now on the front foot and taking the offensive. But we have a game changer here, and it's this main culmination. So we've come all the way up here, and we've come up to the top of this hill in Act 3 before we transition. Again, we transition into our final act, Act 4, the conclusion, the last third of the story thereabouts. And it climaxes very quickly after that main point here. And then it's kind of a downward trajectory from there. So if you were to plot out and graph the story, it would go uphill, uphill, uphill to Act 3 and then start coming back down again. So we've climaxed here. We've got the meeting of the good guy and the bad guy. There's a payoff, but oh wait, there's a plot twist. Your plot point 6, the big twist comes there. There's a bit of a rush to solve that twist, and then a payoff at the end where we resolve everything in the story, hopefully, and don't leave your readers hanging out there too much with too many questions. So plot point 1, game changer, and the first transition in Act 1. But in all of these, what I want you to look at is the following when you plot each of these sections. Again, we're not writing whole chapters. We're not writing dialogue. This is very high level, broad brush strokes. One thing to remember would be guest. Again, something that works for me. So when you're plotting each of these sections, GEST, just like writer, we're looking at GEST. What does all that mean? Well, G is for goal. Have a goal. In fact, have a beginning, middle, and end for this particular section. And at the end, what must the reader know? What's the goal of this section? E is for emotion. Evoke emotion. Make the reader feel something. So you have to emit and evoke that emotion in your writing. If the reader feels nothing, either positive or negative, you need to rewrite it. S, setting or senses. So use all of the senses when describing a scene. What does it smell like? What does it feel like? It's raining. Rain has that, a rainy day has a particular smell about it. Are you at the seaside? That salt spray, that's a smell to it. The spray on your face, you feel that cold water on your face. What are you hearing? Seagulls, children playing in the park behind you. All of those things, the cold touch of a railing on the seashore as you look over a rocky cliffside, or what. All of the senses. Use all of your senses when describing a scene. And T, tension. What does everybody have to lose or gain within this section, chapter, scene? Raise the stakes. It's always a good thing to raise the stakes, especially when you get into that, Act 3, Act 4 thing. You got to really, raise the stakes with tension there. So we're going to, each one of these sections, again, there's plot point 1, that inciting incident with guest in mind. Again, all of these are going to be exactly the same. Short description up here for the synopsis, just to keep you reminded of what's going on within each section. And a section here for notes. So you take all of this, and as it says here, you cut and paste the basic plot line from the plot arc. What do I mean by that? Well, where's our plot arc? It's way back here. So our plot arc. So in Act 1, in our synopsis, preparation, Act 1, preparation in yellow, I would just cut and paste. Now, your third, fourth, or fifth attempt at this synopsis is going to be longer than this. You're going to have more than just one sentence, hopefully. But you're just going to cut and paste this section into the Act 1 of the 4-act structure right here. So cut and paste that. And then just flesh it out using the GEST, GEST, goal, emotion, senses, and tension to plot out that one section of the plot arc here. And you would do the same for Act 2. So in this case, our Act 2, this magenta, this pink color, I would just copy that, go over to Act 2, and look at how that fits into your game changer and your second transition, the transition into that proactive section of the story. Again, just flesh it out. This is your whiteboard. So just make some notes here. Let the creative process just go wild. Again, we're not writing anything. We're just plotting, outlining, structuring our story. All the way through Act 4, the rush to the payoff 2, and then resolve everything. Okay, where do we go from there? We've done all this work. We've plotted out. We've created our little tiny synopsis to our larger, more fleshed out synopsis. We've cut and pasted our color coded notes into the 4-act structure. So now we know where all of these beats happen from our synopsis, and we've transitioned those into all of these beats into the 4 acts. Where do we go from here? Well, it'd be great to start writing, wouldn't it? Well, let's do that. So let's go up to the top and let me close down the characters. And in this template, I have created this is your working section. I like to look at this as my working section. So here are all of the sections that I would put into my book, whether that's an ebook or whatever. So we have all of these little sections here. Your title, the title page, all this front matter kind of stuff, all the information on the series or short stories, what's coming next, a link to your mailing list, which is at the back of the book, dedication, a copyright page. Again, just feel free to change this as you need to change it. The UK English spelling is being highlighted versus the US. So make sure that it works for you. We then get into Act 1. Again, I've repeated the percentage. You can change this up to word count, for example, whatever works best for your workflow. And I've put in some sample chapters here, just placeholders, just to get you started here. So chapter 1, and then scene 1, 2, scene 1, 1, that should be, and scene 1, 2. And you can add more as you go along. So how do we use this writer system to start writing? That would be handy. Well, all of these areas here now become our reference material. So they were our whiteboard, and we take this information and we use that to actually now start writing the story. You can add chapters. Maybe you've got 1, 2, 3 beat points here within Act 1. That may be 3 chapters. Maybe that's the way you want to write this. 3 chapters with a whole lot of scenes. Or you don't You don't write a book with chapters, and it's just one big story with some line breaks, basically, rather than chapters. So just use these points, these notes that you have made, to outline your story here. Get that first draft going. So if our first plot point is the inciting incident, which in our example was Bobby Gant being found dead, tied to the foot of the cliffs in Arbroath once the tide had gone out. That's maybe where you want to start. So, chapter one, scene one is him being tied to the rocks, for example. Scene one, two, maybe the discovery the next morning. However you want to do it is what I'm saying. Be creative. This is a checklist, a to-do list. It is not a this is how you will write your book and not deviate. So use it as you need to. But take these, reread them, go over that, and then go back in here, click on your scene one, 1 as it should be, and just start typing. Get your story done. So go through it all, go through it all, go through it all. So right away, to your heart's content, get that first draft completed, and then you can go back and go over it again and get draft 2 and 3 and however many drafts you want. So that, in short, is the writer system: world, rival, idol, twists, and resolve. It's actually much more than that. It's the checklist. It's a process for going from those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points, taking those concepts, putting them on paper, putting them on the screen, writing a very, very short hook, the synopsis, that two sentence synopsis, asking questions. And it's surprising how many questions you can actually ask of two sentences, and expand your synopsis. Go through that at least 3 times. 4, 5 would be good, so that you have fleshed out, answered all of the questions that you could possibly ask to get the synopsis. Divide the synopsis then. I like to color code it. Again, that's the artist part of me. It makes it easier to figure out what is what and what goes where. And again, in this example and template, I've color coded those that correspond. So the colors correspond to Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4 in this 4-act structure. Insert those points within the beats of each of the acts, and then use that as your notes to then go back into the main part of Scrivener, in this case, to start writing your scenes and chapters in your acts to get your first draft done. Now, something else that I've added a couple of things in this template for you. Again, I'm not taking any credit on these. Publishing notes. Way down the bottom here, I have a section called Publishing Notes. So what is in that? I've got a writing timeline. Now, the writing timeline comes from Honoré Corder. Just cut and paste her publishing checklist. What is it? Well, it's a timeline, and it actually gives you 3 timelines. If you're writing a book and you want to write a book in 100 days or 6 months or 1 year, it takes each section that you have to do, each item, each process that you have to knock out before you have that release party for your new book. That's the last one, and you can put calendar dates on there. So, for example, if you want to outline, if you want to write a book in 100 days, you're going to have to outline your book in 3 days. The next section is a rough draft. Your rough first draft. Again, 100 days. That's going to take you 1 month. If you're plotting a year to write your book, get your book published, then it's 4 months. First draft, your first edit, your second edit, your final proof, formatting, and the advanced reader team goes out. A soft launch, a hard launch, and a release party. That's the fun part, where you get to let your hair down and go, you've just given birth to this this wonderful piece of fiction or nonfiction. This works, of course, in both cases. So I've added that again because I like to use Scrivener as my my one-stop shop for everything to do with my writing business, how I write the book, the novel, and everything associated with that. So when there's a timeline, I want to make sure it's right there, so I'm not switching backwards and forwards within programs. Again, that works for me. I'm surrounded here in my office by notebooks. I love notebooks and actually writing things on a piece of paper, so I do that too. But again, this works really well for me. So I threw that in there because it's some really good stuff from Honore Corder. Now, the other thing that I've added just in the research section, if I go up to that section here in Scrivener, I've added a research folder, and I've included some links, some hyperlinks to some resources, whether they're publishing resources, publishing advice, websites, and some other bits and pieces. Other would be things like Dropbox or Evernote, things that help you do what you do. Literature and Latte, of course, the folks that created Scrivener. WordPress, for example, if you are brand new and you want a free website platform, things like that. So all of these, again, I put these in there because they've worked for me over the last couple of years. Things, for example, publishing advice, self-publishing formula with Mark Dawson, the Creative Pen with Joanna Penn, Kobo Writing Life is a great blog. Reedsy is a fantastic place to hire editors or cover artists, things like that. And then we also have all the publishing resources, the really, really, really important stuff of how you get your book out there and market it. And for example, like on Amazon, MailChimp to organize your very important mailing list. So again, if you're new to this, hopefully that is really useful to you. If you're an old hat at this writing game, feel free to check those out or delete that section. That's okay. This template becomes yours. So thank you. Hopefully this has been an interesting, informative look at, first of all, the way I put together my writing day. Hopefully, if you use Scrivener, this template will be useful and you use it and it becomes part of your writing process and it helps you get those words on the electronic page here in this case, because that's what it's all about. So I'm happy to share this writer system with you. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. My links to Twitter and Facebook are on the website. So again, thank you for this time, and I hope it's useful to you.